What is the soul? If you have a soul, how did you get it? Is consciousness everlasting, or does it have an expiration date? Today we tackle the anatomy of self with an expert in the field, Dr. Joshua Ryan Farris. We are leaving the shallows on this one. Into the deep we go. Welcome. I'm Chris Jones. This is where believers and skeptics alike are invited to embark on a journey of faith, philosophy, and life from a different perspective. Whether we are joined by an insightful guest or we just jump into the deep end, this exploration promises to challenge us all. Are we getting it right? This is Spiritual Hot Sauce. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Joshua Ryan Farris, and his accolades are far too long to mention in full. But let's hit the highlights. He holds a PhD in theology and philosophy from the University of Bristol, has authored or co-authored 11 books, including The Creation of Self, A Case for the Soul, and Introduction to Theological Anthropology, and has published over 50 peer-reviewed articles on everything from consciousness to the afterlife. As a leading authority on the nature of the soul, he is the perfect guest for what we are diving into today, the soul and the anatomy of self. I couldn't think of a better person to explore this with other than Dr. Joshua Ryan Farris. Joshua, welcome to the sauce.
Hey, Chris, good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed your show. I really have. You come at questions in a kind of a different way, so I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and I'm looking forward to this. So before we dive in, I'd like to establish a couple of definitions. These terms have been kind of convoluted over time, so I want to distinguish between eternal and everlasting. Eternal being it's always been, it will always be, it had no beginning, it had no end, it pre-existed before time, before the universe. And the universe can't be eternal because it had a starting point. So even if it lasts forever, it can only be everlasting. So I wanted to establish these definitions because they will significantly impact our discussion regarding the nature of the soul. Let's start there. Without the origins, just tell me kind of a definition of what a soul is.
Well, there's certain characteristics that we can talk about when we talk about the soul. There's certain predicates or properties that we can refer to. The way I come at a soul is it's a term, a rigid designation for, using very, very loose language, a thing or what philosophers call a substance. You know, a soul it's a term that often is thrown around and used by different people to mean different things. Sometimes a soul is used to refer to a sentimental set of properties or a sentimental kind of religious kind of internal life. So you see a lot of soul language throughout even recent history referring to music, a certain kind of music, a certain kind of food, or a certain kind of religious aspiration. Typically, though, in the history of philosophy and theology and the way that I'm using it, I use it in a more technical sense, right? In a more specific sense to refer to what philosophers call, again, a substance of a thing. A substance is something philosophers define as the kind of thing that exists by itself, and it bears certain properties. It has certain events. A soul is a reference or a designator for the kind of thing that has thoughts and experiences, maybe emotional states, ideas, concepts that are predicated of it or said of it. It's the thing that holds them together, you might say, or binds them together. And I think, we could take several thought experiments or arguments, and I would say that when you begin with kind of thinking or what philosophers call mental events, if mental events are had by something or owned by something, it's owned by something that is arguably other than my body or other than my brain.
Mm.
It is something other than that. It is a thing that, as Descartes would call it, or has called it in some of his writings, a thing that thinks. Later philosophers of today
Mm.
would say something more like it's a thing that experiences. It's a thing that has experiences. It's a thing that binds those experiences together. And if those experiences themselves are mental events, they're something other than the brain, they're not reducible or identical to the brain, but something other than the brain, then if there is a thing there that has to have them to make sense of them, then that's what oftentimes many contemporary philosophers refer to as the soul. And it's something that, at least more traditionally, a lot of philosophers and theologians throughout history, in varying ways, would refer to as a soul or think of as a soul.
Hmm. Well, now that you've kind of introduced the soul and you brought up some other things, let's dive into the ideas of where it comes from in the different ways you can look at it. So the first one is a Platonist view. And I don't think it's very popular now, but if you would open that up and tell us about what a Platonist is.
Yeah, kind of a loaded question a little bit, but I would consider myself a Platonist of a sort. I would consider, of course, Descartes' view something like the Platonic view. It's at least, I've called it this at least before. I think it's within the Platonic family, you might say. So it's a
Okay.
family of views, you might say. The Platonic view is something like this. There are these ideas that exist somewhere out there in the Platonic heaven, and you as a soul or as an immaterial thing have access to the Platonic heaven as an immaterial thing. You are that immaterial thing. In other words, you are not your body or your brain or the different parts that comprise your body or your animal, you might say. Some people call it an animal, like this fleshy bit right here is an animal organism or a biological organism. The Platonic view would say something like, roughly speaking, something like, I am my soul that has a body. I am not, strictly speaking, identical to my body. I'm not identified with my body. In a strict sense, my body is not me. And the parts of my body or the properties or the events of my body don't make up what I am fundamentally or essentially. They don't make up what I am or who I am. Who I am is what my soul is, or is identical to my soul. And it's that thing that transcends the natural realm that we live in, or even the physical realm that we live in and exist in and experience through.
We have access to.
Right. And through it, we have access to the other realm, the higher realm that Plato talks about, the unseen realm. You know, when sometimes Paul uses some Platonic sound, at least Platonic sounding language, when he talks about looking through a glass dimly. We don't quite see yet. There's something on the other side that only the soul can access, as it were, or at least soul can access via supernatural knowledge or faith or something of the sort.
Okay.
But
From the Platonist view, what does the origin of the soul look like? Because I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it existed before this kind of an eternal self. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Plato seems to, in different dialogues, affirm, well, whatever whatever he did affirm, for sure, I'm not entirely sure, but he seems to indicate that he affirms something like a soul that preexists. So in different dialogues, he'll talk about this idea that ideas themselves are something that are eternal in themselves, and souls are the kinds of things that have access to those things. And so he seems to think that souls existed even prior to generation or the bodily generation, because to exist in a bodily generation, we couldn't. Our bodies couldn't have access to the kinds of ideas that Plato's after, the kind of the eternal ideas, the abstract forms.
Yeah.
These ideas that are out there that don't, and technically they don't exist here. They exist out there somewhere. So yeah, Plato affirms something I think like a pre-existence view, and we have some cases of that in tradition, even in the Christian tradition, and like Origen seems to affirm something like the Platonic pre-existence view of the soul, that the soul just pre-existed the body, that it didn't come into existence with the body, or it wasn't generated by the body.
When we say pre-existed the body, could that mean in an eternal state before the universe, or could that mean it existed before the body, but not necessarily before time?
Yeah, yeah, good question. Yeah, so there could be different senses of what it means to pre-exist. So
In a
if there
traditional
is a
Platonist view, did he believe that we were in the eternal state before time in some sense of ourselves or after that?
Yeah, I think he did affirm something like a preexistence in before time or outside of time, an atemporal time.
Do you think maybe that's why it fell out of vogue? It's not quite as popular as it once was, although it seems to still have an influence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We were putting together an academic collection on the origin of the soul, a conversation, and I was trying to find somebody who could give a kind of rigorous defense of some kind of pre-existence view. And I was struggling to find someone.
Mm,
Now, it is coming back in vogue, though. I
really?
think there was an OUP book that was put out recently, and actually one of my friends is, like, really interested in a kind of preexistence view. Maybe not the eternal preexistence view, but something like a preexistence view where the soul just preexisted the body in some other time, whatever that means. So one of my friends is actually really intrigued by that idea now.
Hmm.
I'm open to it. But it certainly has fallen on hard times. It hasn't been the kind of dominant position within Christian history as I'm aware. Most affirmed some kind of non-preexistence view, a kind of creationist view that the soul was just created in the body or something like that as it came into
Let's move on
existence.
to that.
Yeah.
So there is the creationist view, and we're not talking about the Big Bang. We're talking about the Big Bang itself, right?
Yeah.
The divine spark. So if you would open that up and tell us about this creationist view of us.
Yeah. Yeah, so the creationist view says very simply or crudely, you might say, it's the view that God kind of just directly and immediately creates the soul or causes the soul to exist in the body, maybe at the time of gestation or
Mm.
conception or something of the sort. God just kind of creates it and it is, right?
In that idea, is it possible that they have to have one another to exist? Is it that kind of an idea that they can't be staggered, they have to happen immediately at the same time, but whenever that life begins? Is that the idea behind that?
Yeah, I think many would understand it that way. Certainly someone like Thomas Aquinas would understand it that way. He
Mhm,
would say
mhm,
something like, the soul couldn't exist without the body. The form is the form of matter, and so they have to exist together in some sort of composite relation. And
mm,
so the soul, when it's created necessarily in the or as the form of the matter in this kind of arranged marriage.
mm,
So you don't have for many Christians who are creationists, many of them would affirm that it exists in the body because the soul is necessarily existing with the body or depends on the body or depends on the brain in some way. And so God creates it that way. It just is designed that way. You don't have unembodied souls, even if you might have disembodied souls. So you might make a distinction between unembodiment and disembodiment.
hmm, hmm,
Yeah.
okay. So, and then you have the Transitianism? Is that
Yeah.
how did I say that right? The
Tradition.
genetic view. Could you,
Yeah.
tell us about that? Open that one up.
Yeah. So the Traducian view says something like this: the soul is generated in some way via some kind of process, maybe a material process, physical process, or maybe some other sort of immaterial process. Depending on who you're looking at, somebody like William Shedd, the Reformed theologian, he affirmed a very kind of exotic view of the origin of the
Mm,
soul, a kind of traducianism, where he says that there are these mental events, and when these mental events occur in procreation between the husband and the wife, there is a kind of generation of, you might think of it as kind of soulish. I think not necessarily. You'd have to think of it almost like soulish stuff that gets
Mm.
generated. And it's kind of like one way to think about it, the way that Shedd seems to talk about is it's like an atom, right, that experiences this kind of event of splitting, where we know atoms split, and
Right.
we can split atoms. So the soul might be something like an atom that splits. It splits into two parts, where the mother and the father give off certain, not just genetic material, right? They give off immaterial that immaterial material. It's probably not material, but they give off some immaterial events or mental events that are then conjoined that create this new life, that generate a new life. They're not actually creating. I mean, at least most
Right, right.
traditional traditions would say that at one level, at least God creates at least one, if not two, necessarily creates one, if not two souls that then within themselves have the kind of mechanisms or the potencies or the powers to generate other souls via
Yeah.
this procreative process. And so you can already begin to see maybe the appeal of that view.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
It reminds me of kind of how there's certain Native Americans and almost Confucianism that believes that it's not proprietary, the soul, that it is in the bloodline and you're just the manifestation of it currently. And as you connect and you make life, it continues on through that vein. So it's a little different. So it's not the same, but it does share that idea that we have the ability to, in some way, a divine spark in us or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is
Oh,
some kind of divine spark or some potentiality, which is really quite attractive at one level. It's quite fascinating. Yeah, that God would give us that kind of power. It's not a power creation ex nihilo. I mean, I think we would deny that as at least Orthodox Christians. We would say that that can't be, right? It's not
right,
creation ex
right.
nihilo, but it is some kind of shared power, procreative power that God gives us, grants to his image bearers or something of the sort.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and the next one I want to talk about is off the beaten path here, but it pertains, and that's the Buddhist view, and that is there is no soul. It is an illusion. That is a collective consciousness, and we are just experiencing kind of ourselves in the grand scheme of things, kind of riding the wave of, and through time and consciousness, we're like the sea foam, and as we collectively get better and better, we find our way to nirvana. So it's says that there is no self. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this view is actually it has a prominent history. It's kind of elusive to it's hard to talk about this view. It's elusive when you start talking about it.
It is very different.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's gaining some traction. I think it's becoming more in vogue in
Well, I think it leans
wider.
into materialist. I think it is a kind of a fellow kindred spirit there almost, if you'll pardon the
Yeah.
pun. You know what I mean? There's a connection there.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think, one of the contemporary I don't know if he would call his view Buddhist exactly, but I think he does affirm a no self view of consciousness and that there is
Mm,
one singular consciousness, and that singular consciousness we can't look directly at. As soon as we see it, if we do gain a glimpse of it, maybe through psychedelic means or something, when we turn away, we forget what we see. So there's a lot of like new age. Well, I guess I call it new age. The new age. It's coming back in different forms now. It's really interesting to see. But Bernardo Kastrup is one of those guys of defending something like this view, the no self view. There is no substantial self. There is consciousness, but that consciousness itself it's elusive. He calls it like alter consciousnesses, that you are, if you think of the psychological problem of altered states of consciousness or dissociative states of consciousness,
mhm.
you are that of the one consciousness. You just happen to be in this mode of existence right now or something like that, where you have your own altered state, but it's really just an altered state of the one unifying bigger consciousness that you're a part of.
You're an
But you're not
aspect
really
of
a
it.
part.
Yeah.
You're an aspect of it. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on then to the final one I know, and that's a materialist. And that's just your neurons are firing and creating this feeling of identity. But once the physical man lays down and is gone, then so is the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's the materialist view that denies that there is a soul. Like there is no soul. Then you have materialist options about, well, what does it mean to be me or you? What is personal identity? How do we make sense of that? So some materialists would say, well, somebody like Shoemaker or something, Sidney Shoemaker would say that I am my brain or something of the sort. The most likely material thing that I could be would be my brain, where my brain is the kind of central system that controls the rest of my body or something like that. Or others would say something more along the lines of, no, I'm just a really complex biological organism. I'm an
Mm.
animal. In other words, this has become more popular today. I am my animal. I am a human animal, just a distinct, individualized biological animal that I am right here. And this is where I'm at. This is where I'm at.
Mm.
I am this biological animal. This instantiation of what it means to be a human natural kind or something like
Mm.
that. I am an instantiation of this human kind, so I am an animal. Yeah, and you certainly recent history, even more Christians have come around to this view and it's become more prominent, and actually a lot of people have started accepting this in recent history, and that's interesting in and of itself. Yeah, why are people I think there's a reaction now to it, but I think it's been quite in vogue for a little while now.
Do you feel like that's the rise kind of in scientism of
Yeah.
that idea that it has to be a materialist thing for us to
Yeah,
realize
I
it?
yeah, I do think that has a lot to do with it. I think there's a large contribution from scientism, strong or weak scientism, and this overwhelming impression that the empirical method, some sort of strict empirical method, is all that we have in terms of knowledge or how we can arrive at knowledge.
Mm.
And so there's these historical forces, intellectual forces kind of coming in and shaping how it is that how it is that we see the world and how it is that
Yeah.
we perceive the world. So I think certainly scientism has been quite prominent in recent history, intellectual history, and in various disciplines, academic disciplines, and that's even crept into Christian theological circles,
Yeah.
where kind of dominated how kind of the authority or the auspices of how it is that we construct our theology. I think that's right. Yeah, definitely.
So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, materialists seem to kind of wave a white flag when it comes to consciousness, which leads me into something I talk about frequently on the podcast, and that is our compass, I call it. And the compass is meant to help us get through adversity in life and how we choose. And we talk about life being a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
But it speaks to what I would call our inner duality, our battle within. And I say that north represents our emotions, which are our wants, our needs, our desires, our fears. And emotions don't understand investment of long-term behaviors. They want immediate gratification. And the opposite of that is our center, our essence, our will. It's how we choose, and we use logic. And we know that doing hard things now gets us to a better place later. And I think this kind of speaks to me anyway, our physical person, man, and our soul, our essence. And there is a tension. There's fight within for the control. But at the same time, it reminds me of kind of like tectonic plates, you know, how they hit each other and there's this friction. And when they move, there's an atmospheric spark because there's this light. So I can't help but feel or think that tension between our physical man and our soul is what creates that spark, that tension that we call consciousness. So if you would weigh in on that, I would love to hear your opinion.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that there certainly could be some kind of mind on brain dependence relationship that is necessary for at least maybe for our functional consciousness. How do we understand what the mind is? I think the mind is something that, if we're following someone like Richard Fumerton, the epistemologist, he would say that there is something about I mean, you could think of it as common sense or intuition or the like. Immediately upon reflection of our own mental states or our own consciousness, there are arguably two sets of properties that are, or events that are occurring that we have some kind of access to, or even we know, at least intuitively, we know these things because we know the physical by way of as a thing that is kind of mediated by way of concepts that we have access to in our own minds or our own mental events. And the knowledge that we do have of it, although we do have it, is mediated. It's still mediated, but it's mediated by something that seems to be more immediate. The immediate thing that is there in our mental events are, well, just the mental events themselves. So Richard Firmiton, this sort of empiricist, he argues that in our phenomenal experiences, we know there are two types of properties or two types of events immediately in our kind of epistemic kind of wherewithal or cognitive structure. We phenomenally experience the world, and the phenomenal experience of the world is a phenomenal experience first and foremost or immediate of the world that is mediated through the phenomenal frame, as it
Mm-hmm.
were. So if that's right, then we're in this kind of question. We're confronted with a kind of question about what it is that we're actually talking about. Formerton doesn't want to give an answer to what it is we're talking about. Being a good empiricist, he just wants to do epistemology. So he doesn't want to say anything about the metaphysics of the thing itself.
Mm.
But he says we're in this kind of epistemic position where we have these two different types of events, one mental event and the other physical events. And we know the physical events, but we only know it mediated by something. And we can infer its existence by way of the immediate knowledge that we have of it, and we can kind of put it through these sort of rings and tests and empirical tests, and we can study it. But at one level, if there is anything beyond the kind of the empirical itself, we can't be sure that we have direct access to it. So, in other words, so this brings us to a kind of problem insofar as if we're trying to get at the mental events that we have immediate access to, and then we realize there are these physical events that we have access to, but only mediated by the kind of immaterial or the phenomenal experiences, the mental events themselves. If we're trying to make sense of these mental events by way of the physical, then it seems we're in a kind of quandary. So then we have to ask the question, well, what kind of physical event would make sense of or undergird or explain the mental events themselves? And so then we would have to ask that further question, well, what kind of thing would that be? And I think there is no kind of physical thing that we could actually point to and find that would do justice as the kind of ground or explanation, the thing that would make sense of the mental events themselves. Yeah. I got a bit abstract there, but come back at me with your thoughts because
So what I'm hearing is consciousness is obviously not tangible, and it kind of comes from something else, and we're just simply not aware of what it truly is. And it's hard to nail down of what it is, but it is self. It is our experience. It's how we experience the external and the internal.
yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. It is. It is. It's how we experience the internal and the external. What it is that we internally experience, what it is that we have access to. Some philosophers would call like the distinctive kind of feature of consciousness is this kind of private character
Hmm.
that nobody else really has access to, or at least no direct access to. I mean, you can look at kind of brain maps. You could look at brain maps of even my brain, and you could infer certain kinds of information about my mental and emotional states from that based upon, a long history in neuroscience of studying these things and acquiring information about what different patterns in the brain does and what kind of emotional states it correlates with, right? So you could kind of maybe map it out in kind of inferential way, but you don't have you don't when you look at a brain map, you're not seeing my mind directly. You're not
Right.
having access to my mind directly or the mental events themselves
If that
directly.
was true, neuroscience could tell us exactly what consciousness is, but they
Right.
can't.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. So let's get into self versus personas, because we talk about the social construct,
Yeah.
and that I've said in the past that a social construct's nothing more than an overgrown market. It's become so it's so complex. But essentially that's what we do. We develop these personas and how we interact with the market, and we go to the social construct and we are part of it and we develop these personas. But our true self, I think we get confused of who we truly are. And we end up feeling like or thinking that these personas we develop to work or do the things we do in the social construct are us. However, I think that's kind of what Jesus had talked about when he was talking about the Levite and the Levite priest in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that they were kind of NPCs, these religious non-player characters, that they were just playing the personas and their roles. But it's the Good Samaritan that comes out of their persona from self and chooses to help based on their own need. Would you say that is from their consciousness, or would you say that is from their true identity, their true self?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never been asked that kind of question.
It's a spiritual hot sauce, man. My brain doesn't act normal. It's different.
So we're talking about these NPCs that Jesus is interacting with.
The non-player character. Yeah, where he says the robbers beat the man and they leave him for dead and they take everything. And then it says a Levite and a Levite priest. They see the man, but they pass by. And I had said in a previous episode that they are religious non-player characters. They're simply in the social construct, fulfilling their personas or their roles, but it is the Good Samaritan that stops and helps. But he had a place to go to as well. So he also had a persona. But he stepped out of this character in the social construct to choose from self to actually choose humanity over the social construct. And I think what I was
Yeah.
trying to just simply say is we see the social construct sometimes as humanity, and it's not. It is just the marketplace. That what should take priority over that is how we interact with people when they have need. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to say, because he is talking to a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so I think there's certain so I had this professor who was a kind of a weird kind of Berkeleyan idealist, and he would say, well, we just are the personas that we play. So we have these different personas in life and we take on these different masks
Mm-hmm.
and we're kind of just the conglomeration of those different personas that we take on. And that's what we are. We are what we become. And so we're kind of this bundle of different personas that some of which dominate in our lives over time. And so he kind of took that view.
And I would agree with that, but I would also agree that if you allow that to happen, you can end up in a very miserable state.
Sure. Yeah. So does that raise a question about, yeah, I guess, is there some sort of core self that is that
Mm.
is pure and unsoiled?
Yeah.
And so in the
Doesn't our
market,
personas happen in the external that would speak to our physical man? But yet still internally, we are still self. We are just learning how to interact with the social construct, with the external.
yeah. So there's a presumption, at least, that there is some kind of unified self, even as we're in the marketplace of different personas, that we can take on different personas or personality traits, and that those personas or personality traits in the marketplace can actually fragment us,
Yeah.
and they become something that ultimately we, or at least at our core, maybe we're not, or it
Could leave us confused about who we truly are.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's what Jesus's message was there, was, though you are in the world, don't be of it. I think another way to say that is, though you are in the social construct, don't be defined by the laws. Don't stop at not hurting other people. That to do good is to go take care of other people of your own expense. That's his idea of love, of how he explained it anyway. That's how he defined it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have several thoughts. I think, yeah, I mean, you could think of this as kind of less like the Berkeleyan kind of bundle of properties idea. Not every Berkeleyan affirms that. I don't want to leave that impression, but that was kind of my professor's kind of view.
Yeah.
You could take the kind of Aristotelian view or something like this, and maybe this doesn't map onto what Jesus is doing. I'm just teasing out some different ways you could think about this.
Yeah.
You might think, along with the Aristotelian idea, that there is some kind of substantial whole, some sort of substantial form that is in a material relationship that itself can either be fragmented or can be an integrated, unified self. And by way of, at least in the context of kind of the Gospels and the redemptive situation, where we are not interacting with our environment in the way that is full or complete or holistic, we are, as it were, effectively fragmenting ourselves, fragmenting our consciousness, and becoming less self rather than more self, or
Mm.
fuller self. So you might think of the self as a kind of in a virtue construct that way, along the
Mm.
Aristotelian line or something, that maybe there is this higher ideal that ourselves are truly called to in the Gospels, and
Mm.
by not giving ourselves, as it were, to the one in need, we are becoming less selves or something like that. We are becoming,
Interesting.
in that virtue context, we are becoming vicious in our character, which is effectively bringing about some kind of fragmentation of the soul.
Mm.
Maybe you think about it that way. Maybe
Yeah.
that's one way to think.
Almost death of ourself. As
Yeah,
we become selfish to ourselves, that's when we actually find death. It's counterintuitive. So,
yeah, yeah,
nice.
yeah,
I like that. Interesting.
yeah.
All right, so let's do a hard pivot because I want to get into the views that you hold, which is a Cartesian dualism position. I
Mhm.
think it's called like the ghost in the machine, correct? That there is our soul and the machine is the physical body.
Yeah.
And before we jump into that, because I have to ask, because typically, I think traditionally, it's believed that what connects these two is the pineal gland. So, my
Uh-huh.
question for you is, do you hold that? Because I know you also hold yourself to be a neo-Cartesian substance dualism. So, I'm just going to hand every bit of that to you and let you unpack that and make it digestible.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so the Cartesian or the neo-Cartesian view is pretty close to, if not effectively the same as the kind of crude Platonic view or picture that we talked about earlier,
Okay.
insofar as my personhood is identical to my soul or the
Okay.
immaterial thing that I am. The immaterial thing is what makes me me. In other words, there is nothing about my body or brain that even comes close to making sense of who I am or
Mm.
making sense of what I am. So we could go through and, reflect on different parts of the body and say, well, is that me? And there's no garden variety object that would seem to come close. The brain would be the closest, maybe. You might say, I mean, intuitively, some would say it comes close because it's kind of the operation central kind of control center,
Mm.
or at least many neuroscientists think of it as that, as such. So many of the operations, the more complex operations in our biology, is controlled in some way by the brain or something like that. But so you might think that gets the closest. But Cartesians would say, well, it doesn't seem that actually any of that, even the brain, gets close to personal identity.
Hmm.
The real sort of kind of impulse or motivation for the Cartesian is that the self is something that arguably I have access to, and you have access to, if your mind is like my mind, that I have immediate access to via the consciousness. And it's via that consciousness, I have some kind of rigid designation or something that informs what I am, informs what or who I am in virtue of the fact that I have access to it. And I can, when I refer to it, I refer appropriately, I refer rightly to it. So I'm using the concept of the I in a self-referential way, in a real way. I'm referring to the self. And if that's the case, well, it seems the strength of the Cartesian view is that the self, the I, is something that only I have access to, and it must be something other than the body and the brain, because there's no other designation within the garden variety material objects that actually make sense of me or even close to make sense of me. So something like that is the Cartesian view or the neo-Cartesian view, that there are these mental properties or mental events and these physical events, and the mental properties or mental events are what gets closest to what makes me me. If I have mental events, the question is, or the assumption is, those mental events are mental themselves. They are a thing themselves. They are substantial, as it were. So most neo-Cartesians today would generally agree with René Descartes. Now, they wouldn't agree with all the particulars of what he says or necessarily the idea that consciousness is somehow physically located in the pineal gland. Whatever that means, they wouldn't necessarily affirm that. So a neo-Cartesian like myself would not affirm that. Yeah, this is at one level, when you start thinking about consciousness, it becomes very intuitive, and I think it's probably true, or at least close to true, if there is a true view. At another level, it does seem intuitive or unintuitive to many people. It's highly controversial as a view. Most people, upon reflection, when you say that I am my soul, and I'm not strictly speaking a body or my body or brain, a lot of people find that really unintuitive. It's really at one level, it's quite an unpopular view, certainly unpopular within academic circles.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, yeah, I think it's unpopular because we're so enmeshed in our bodies. We live and breathe and enjoy and experience in and through our bodies. So our bodily experiences are so intimate. They're so intimately related to me and my consciousness. So it's hard. I think it's difficult, certainly, to extricate that or to make those kinds of distinctions. You know, there's lots of ideas that we could throw out there, like, okay, if your spouse, you kiss your spouse, there's this unintuitive idea, well, it's not really you kissing your spouse, it's your body kissing the spouse's body or something like that. It's not a real thing. So you might say, well, if that's the case, well, that seems pretty unintuitive. I think people are untutored to be what you might call dualists. People are.
So let's open that up, because I think dichotomy, that is probably where you and the church, I should say the church global, start to have a differing opinion, because we have always believed that we are a three-part being. And as your spirit, your soul, and your body, or mind, body, and soul, however you want to say it, but it's in three parts. And in a Cartesian view, or neo-Cartesian substance dualism kind of view, substance dualist, you believe that we are in two parts, which is our soul and our physical body.
Yeah. So you're talking about the trichotomist versus dichotomist view. Yeah, and that's interesting. I'm certainly open to the trichotomist view. I'm not closed off to it. I'm not sure if I understand it. I mean, I've read, various systematic theologies that talk about the trichotomist view, and there's certain biblical material we can point to that seem to suggest that there's a distinction between something like a spirit and a mind or something of the sort. And I was raised in charismatic circles, and so a lot of charismatic theologians tend to be trichotomous today. So I'm not opposed to it. I'm not closed off to it. I'm just not sure I understand it. I think the sort of Cartesian dualist view might be compatible with it, but I haven't seen too much written on the trichotomous view in recent kind of contemporary academic theology. I would like to see more. There was a New Testament scholar who wrote a defense of the trichotomous view. It wasn't really a defense. It was kind of a exploration and retrieval of how to read Paul as a trichotomist. I read that text years and years ago, but I just haven't seen much on the position. It's hard enough in this day and age to grasp kind of what a soul is or an immaterial, then further to grasp what the spirit is.
And now, in your idea of a soul, would you say, is it eternal, is it everlasting, or is it temporal? What is your opinion of it?
Yeah, the time question is really elusive to me. I think, I have two minds about this. I mean, I think a sort of presentism that we exist temporally seems to be the common sense view. It seems to be, we just exist in and through time. I can't make sense of my own experiences without some sort of temporal index, some sort of time or tensed nature to the experience. The experience itself seems to go through movements, and not just spatial movements, but temporal movements. So I can't seem to make sense of experiences without temporal. But on the other hand, when I think about like consciousness, and I think about consciousness space, within consciousness space, I think the existentialists really do well with this. One of my influencers who's influenced my thought a lot is Stephen Priest, who reads a lot of existentialists. But he says when we think about, or when we dwell upon our own consciousness, there's something necessarily present in our consciousness that is present to being itself. And being, whatever that is, ultimate being, seems to be present or a presence within our own consciousness. When you start going down that line of thought, it doesn't seem that being itself is tensed or temporal. It seems to be something other, but it's kind of hard to grasp, or it is kind of elusive. As soon as I start thinking about my own consciousness space, I'm thinking about, or I'm experiencing some kind of presence, and presence itself entails some sort of being. So is that, I don't know.
That's an honest answer. I love it. So let me throw this at you, because this is a two-part thing. I'm gonna get your insight on it. In the very same place I was talking about with Jesus and the lawyer, where he talks about the Good Samaritan, one of the things that started me down this kind of different way of thinking is something that the lawyer asked him, and Jesus doesn't correct him. And he asked Jesus, how do I inherit eternal life? And I was like, man, that's a loaded question. That is so big. And, because what he is saying is, how do I inherit a life that has no beginning, no ending, that's always been, that will always be, that predates time? So he's talking about exactly why most people of faith believe Jesus came, and that's to bring us this Zoe, this life. That's it sounds like not by the natural order of things, our life, because he asked, how do I inherit it? So it's like it's God's life he's bringing, from the exterior of the universe, from the eternal state, bringing it to us through Jesus.
Yeah.
That kind of throws a whole different idea on traditionally what we would perceive as life. So what's your ideas and your thoughts when I put it that way? Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, Zoe, I think, has a fuller connotation to it than than mere kind of mental life or bodily life. I think Zoe tends to, in the New Testament, it tends to be a fuller kind of life that's being referenced, a kind of completer
Something
life.
out of what we have access to that would take some, like Jesus coming from the
Yeah.
eternal to bring it to us?
Yeah, that's right. Like Paul talks about in Ephesians, where the
Mhm,
fullness of deity is given to us in Christ Himself, which is certainly external to us. It's outside of ourselves. We don't have it within ourselves.
mhm.
I mean, we might have some kind of immortality, but that's not. I don't think that's the same thing or identical to
Speaking of something different, isn't it?
eternal life. Yeah, it is something different. I think it's something different, certainly. So the reformers, the way they would interpret Adam and Eve is that Adam and Eve had some kind of conditional, some sort of immortality that they just would live on and sort of in some kind of unending existence. But I think when Jesus talks about life and life eternal, that is given it is something that is not achievable by the self or by the
Mm,
soul. It's something other than, something that's external to us. Yeah, certainly, I think the Zoe is different from that. I mean, when you bring Zoe in conversation with, like, Hebrew ruach and nephesh in the Old Testament, I think, yeah, whilst there might be overlapping meanings there does seem to be a distinction between the kind of life Zoe that is given. That is, you might even maybe think of these as types. I mean, in Genesis chapter 2, verses 7, where or God Himself gives breath and makes the living being alive, and we have this kind of image in the dry valley where God brings to life the
mhm.
bones. It seems to be almost, I think it's a kind of creation picture where He's creating something and giving life to it. The
But not a
Gen-
Zoe life, 'cause a life
Not the
like we
Zoe life.
understand it. Yeah, okay,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, I mean, it might be kind of a type of that, a type of something to come that is fuller kind of life, and it's all given to us by God. But in
Mhm,
Genesis 2:7, it certainly seems to be the breath seems to be a kind of animating life that is creational life, whereas Zoe is a kind of, if you think of it in this kind of this reformed distinction of creation and redeemed order.
mhm,
The redeemed order is a different kind of life, a fully resurrected life that's given to us externally, and created life or animating life, which makes us alive in a different sense, is something that too is given to us, but is intrinsic to our very nature. It's something that, I think older interpreters would interpret like in Ecclesiastes 12:7, which picks up on, I think, Genesis 2:7. It's this idea that the life, referring to the soul. Now, there are lots of Old Testament interpreters who would disagree with this way of reading, and we could have that discussion. I think this is many theological interpreters throughout church history would read it this way in Ecclesiastes 12:7. When the body goes to the grave, it's the life that goes back to God. And I think what's being referred to is the soul itself is going back to God in some form or fashion
m'kay.
as the body dies. But yeah, but that is different than Zoe. Zoe is a kind of eternal life
Mhm.
that is more than unending existence. It's the fullness of existence. It's deity given.
It's
It's
almost
divinity that's given.
assimilation with God Himself and His life
Yeah.
and outside the it's a whole different thing. So I was wanting to get your
Right.
input on it.
Yeah. It's deification, right? What the
Yeah,
Eastern Orthodox call deification
yeah,
is it's a mystery. It's a mystery that's important in Scripture in terms of it's an informing category that is actually mysterious in itself.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
mystery.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
divine life given to human life, whilst retaining the distinction between creator and creature. The creator gives life, his own life, to creatures.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, let me throw the second part of this at you. It says that we are a living tabernacle. And when I think of the tabernacle, or, the later the temple and the second temple, I think of the construction of it. It was in 3 parts. Now, the outer courtyard would represent our flesh. The holy place would represent our soul, what we've been talking about. And the third place, as a trichotomist, that would represent spiritually. But when I think about it, the first temple fulfilled its purpose because it had the Ark of the Covenant in that Holy of Holies. In other words, God was in that temple. The Spirit of God was in that Holy of Holies. But the second temple came about after the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, and that's when they lost the Ark of the Covenant. So when Jesus shows up, the temple he deals with doesn't have that in the Holy of Holies. Essentially, it's dead. The only thing it has is what we would say, kind of in reference to what we're talking about, it's flesh and it's soul. It's a duality. It's in 2 pieces. Without the Spirit of God making it a trichotomous, that's the right way to say it, in 3 parts, there's no life. There's only life to itself, because that's what that temple was doing. It was serving itself to the point Jesus is flipping tables. So when I start thinking about that in those terms, I start thinking archetypally like the number 3, which is the number of completion or synthesis. It's the beginning, the story, and the end. And I always think of it in terms of music. In music, you can have 2 notes. They can be in tune with one another. They can tune to themselves, but they're isolated. They typically will just serve themselves. But when you add the 3rd note, it's a complete chord. It's major or it's minor, and not only does it have a higher purpose, but now the Ionian theory or major theory says that all scales, all music, they all are the same universe. It's all the same scale. It's just different variations. You belong to something bigger. So when I think of it in those terms, it's almost like you could have a dichotomy and a trichotomy both exist simultaneously, that without God, without that Zoe that we were just talking about, that eternal life, you can tune to yourself, but you'll probably just be like that second temple where you just serve yourself. But if you have that third to tune to, where you are of something bigger than you, that's universal energy and part of God, then you end up probably serving humanity and serving the greater good like Jesus did.
Yeah, I think creationally, I think what we can be more sure of is that certainly if we step back and think philosophically, I think we can step back and say that there are 2 parts insofar as there are 2 types of events that we've talked about, the mental events and the physical events. And I think if we look back at certain creational texts in the Old Testament, we could say something along those lines as well, that there are these two parts. Now, that gets confirmed, I think, when we think about the afterlife. If we're thinking kind of individualistically, or we're thinking about the individual and the composition of individual humans or persons themselves, if we have, this is kind of the argument that John Cooper makes in his book, Body, Soul, and Life Everlasting. He makes this argument that, well, we seem to have a lot of material in the Old Testament that seem to suggest that we are 2 parts. We are body and we are mind, or body and soul, or something like that. And whatever the arrangement of those 2 things are, we have these kind of 2 irreducible parts. The soul cannot be reduced to the body, and the body itself seems to be distinct from the soul and is probably not reducible to the soul itself. But because it seems to have, at least commonsensically, an existence all on its own. So that's why when you die, commonsensically, the body is still your body, but you're just not there animating the body. You're not living in and through the body or experiencing the body. And so there's this practice we have in Christianity of burial, and there are places actually where physical bodies go. But there also seems to be this other teaching that there are spirits or soul-like things that exist distinct from the body. That
Mm-hmm.
gets picked up in the New Testament when we think about the disembodied intermediate state. That's John Cooper's argument, that if there is a disembodied intermediate state, that is kind of the prominent teaching within Scripture, then it seems to entail something, or at least the inference to the best explanation is something like a soul that is distinct from the body, and that soul can exist on and live on beyond or without the body.
Mm-hmm.
It can exist in this, again, this disembodied state where the body is somewhere and the soul is existing in a different way, at least. So, at least that seems to be a clear. As far as this third part in the temple, that's an interesting that's an interesting line of thought, and I think there have been church fathers maybe who have thought along those lines. I don't know. I wonder about that. I wonder if the third part, the Zoe that's given, the resurrected life,
Mm-hmm.
is the reconstituted temple, and that is
Hmm.
this new life that is given in and through the corporate entity itself.
Hmm. That we are the living stones. Yeah.
Yeah. Or something like that. So we're the church. The church is the new living temple. It's the reconstituted temple. It is the body of Christ that is given the life, and that's a collective unity or
I like
collective
that.
entity.
That's a
It's a
good insight.
corporate entity.
It brings us together in unity. It gives us something bigger than ourselves, which is the body of Christ for the here and now. That's
Yeah,
some very good insight. I like that. I never thought about it in that way.
yeah. Maybe it's all wrong, but yeah, maybe.
I liked it. I liked it.
Good.
Well, listen, this has been really fantastically interesting. I have loved it, and I thank you for your time. You've been very generous with it. And I want to give you the opportunity to tell us what you're working on, where we can go get your books, and how we can contact you. If you would take some time to tell us about what you got going on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so I've been working on a nonprofit for the last couple of years called Soul Science Ministries, and you can see it on soulscienceministries.com, soulscienceministries.com. So I'll say that 3 times, right?
Yes.
And then people will remember it. And so that's where you might think of it as an educational resource and apologetics, broadly speaking, apologetics. People have different views on what apologetics is, but looking at the question of what it means to be human in light of the next age, the new age and tech. The goal is to navigate that world. So so we have a lot in the works at Soul Science, a lot that we're working on this coming year, and hopefully a big conference in November. But we're still solidifying that, so I can't officially announce it yet. But it's going to be fun. Big names are going to be here. We're going to have a big discussion about what it means to be human, mind, brain, and machine.
I love it.
So you can find some of my works there, more academic works. My more mainstream popular work is coming out this summer called Why Souls.
Why
Why
souls?
Souls. So I think it's my most accessible, readable book defending the soul and its implications for the universe. Yeah, Why Souls? Why Souls? So, yeah,
Where
please
would
do
they
check
go
that
to
out.
to get
Yeah.
this?
It'll be out everywhere on every major platform, obviously Amazon, but it's published by If Publishers or Collective Inc.
Okay.
And it'll be out in June, and you can buy it on any of the major platforms, Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com, any of the major platforms. Yeah, so do check that out. Yeah.
And if somebody wants to get in contact with you, do you have a way for people to reach out?
Yes. So you can contact me through soulscienceministries.com through the website. I also offer consultation on publishing through becomingaffaithbasedauthor.com. You can contact me there if you're interested in anything related to publishing and writing and the like. I offer a lot of consultation on that. I do have my personal email address. It's on the web. You can find it. But if you go to either one of those sites, you can email me there directly. Obviously, I'm on social media, so you can find me there. You can find me on Facebook as well through Soul Science. You can contact me that way. Yeah, so lots of different ways you can contact me. And my email is on there. You can find my academic work on academia.edu if you're more interested in more the academic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have an academia page, so you can find me there as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. This has been awesome. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been very enlightening. Thank you for opening up some of these ideas and explaining them. So I hope to get you back on here when you get the new book out. So
that'd be great.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for joining me here on Spiritual Hot Sauce. I'd love to hear from you, so please reach out with questions, comments, and/or concerns. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us. You can follow us on Facebook for updates and information. And if you enjoy the flavor of the sauce, then please share it with others. I would appreciate that. We'll see you next time.